Pollyanna by Eleanor H. Porter. Chapter 1. Miss Polly. Miss Polly Harrington entered her kitchen hurriedly this June morning. She did not usually make hurried movements, but today she was hurrying. Nancy was washing the dishes. She was a maid, and she was working in Miss Polly's kitchen only 2 months. "Nancy!" "Yes, madame," answered Nancy, but she was still washing the dishes. "Nancy, when I'm talking to you, stop your work and listen to me," said Miss Polly. Her voice was stern. "Sorry, madame," said Nancy. Nancy never worked before, but after her father's death, she had to work because her mother was sick and she had 3 younger brothers. "When you have finished your work, please clean the little room in the attic, prepare the bed, and sweep the room. Clear out the boxes." "Yes, madame. And where shall I put the boxes?" "In the front attic." Miss Polly hesitated, and then went on. "Nancy, my niece, Miss Pollyanna Whittier, is coming to live with me. She is 11 years old. She will sleep in that room. Make the room upstairs ready for her." "A little girl!" cried Nancy. She felt very happy. "How nice! She will live with us." "Nice? I don't think so. However, I am a good woman, I hope, and she is my sister's daughter. I know my duty." "Of course, madame, and this little girl can change your life." "I don't need to change my life. Now go and get the room ready," said Miss Polly, and left the room. Miss Polly was in her room now. She had a letter in her hand. It said, "Dear Madame, Minister John Whittier died 2 weeks ago, leaving her daughter, 11 years old. Her name is Pollyanna Whittier. John Whittier was the pastor of a small church, and he had very low salary, so he left nothing, only a few books. I think the families were not on good terms, but your sister's daughter has nobody to live with now. Will you please take care of the child? Hoping to hear from you soon. Respectfully yours, Jeremiah O. White." Miss Polly answered the letter. She wrote in her letter, "I will take the child." Her thoughts went back to her sister. Jenny, her sister, had moved away with her husband. A wealthy man had wanted to marry Jenny, and her family had preferred that man, but Jenny had not. She had married the minister and had gone south with him, but after a few years, Jenny had died. Miss Polly was 40 now, and she was alone in the world. Her father, mother, and sisters all were dead. The people pitied her because of her lonely life, but she liked being alone. But now... Nancy was cleaning the room, and she was speaking by herself. "There are a lot of empty rooms in the house. Why do I have to clean this small and hot room? Poor little girl, how can she live here?" Nancy finished cleaning the room and came out to the garden. Old Tom was busy with the flowers. He was the gardener of the house for at least 30 years. "Mr. Tom, do you know that a little girl is coming here to live with Miss Polly?" asked Nancy. What?" asked the old man. He was surprised. "A little girl? You are joking." "No, it's true. She is Miss Polly's niece. She is 11 years old. She will live with Miss Polly." "So it must be Miss Jenny's little child," he said thoughtfully. "Who's Miss Jenny?" "She was an angel. She was a good, very good and pure person. Everybody loved her, but she died. She was Miss Polly's sister. She got married and went away from here long years ago. Her babies all died except the last one. I've cleaned the small room in the attic for the little girl. What a shame! How can a child live with Miss Polly?" "I think you don't like Miss Polly very much," said the gardener. "Who can love her?" cried Nancy. "I guess you didn't know about Miss Polly's love affair." "I don't believe it." "You should. She was very beautiful, but she was stern. Later, she got cross with her lover, and they separated. He lives in this town, but I will not tell his name." Chapter 2. Pollyanna is coming. The important day arrived at last. A telegram came about Pollyanna's coming. After reading the telegram, Miss Polly went to see the little girl's room. A bed, a table, and 2 chairs were in the room. There were no curtains at the windows, no pictures on the wall. The little room was like an oven. There were no screens, so the windows were closed. A big fly was going up and down in the room. Miss Polly killed the fly and left the room. "Nancy," she said at the kitchen door, "I found a fly upstairs in Miss Pollyanna's room. Don't open the windows. My niece is coming tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Please meet her at the station. Timothy will drive you there. The telegram says, 'Light hair, red checked dress.' That's all I know, but I think it's enough." "Yes, madame, but you—" "No, I shall not go. It is not necessary. That is all," said Miss Polly, and turned away. The next day, Nancy and Timothy, the son of the old gardener Tom, went to the station to meet the guest. Tom was a good-looking and polite young man. Nancy and Timothy were good friends. Then the train arrived. Nancy was excited. She saw the little girl and knew her easily. She had an old dress and a hat on. She was standing by herself. Nancy approached her. "Are you Miss Pollyanna?" she asked. The girl put her arms around Nancy and said, "Oh, I'm very happy. Of course I'm Pollyanna, and I'm glad you came to meet me." "This is Timothy. Do you have a trunk?" asked Nancy. "Yes, I have," answered Pollyanna. "There were some very helpful women in my village. The Ladies' Aid. They bought a new trunk for me." Tim took her trunk, and they were off at last. Pollyanna talked and talked on the way home. She never stopped. "Is the house far? I love traveling by car. This place is beautiful. Is your house big, Aunt Polly?" Nancy was surprised. "Oh, no, Miss Pollyanna, I'm not your aunt." "So who are you?" asked Pollyanna. "I'm Nancy. I help your aunt with the housework. I'm a maid," she said. Pollyanna stopped talking for a moment. Then she started again. "I'm glad that my aunt didn't come, because I've met you, and I still wonder about my aunt. My father told me everything about this place." She was quiet for a few minutes because she remembered her father, and she was sad. Then she began talking again. "My father is in heaven with my mother now, and they are watching me from the sky, but I really miss them." Nancy was sorry for her. After some minutes, they arrived home. "This house is very big," cried Pollyanna. "Aunt Polly must be very rich," she said. "Yes, she is rich," said Nancy. "It must be lovely to have lots of money. I never knew rich people, only the Whites. They're rich, I think. They have carpets in every room, and they eat ice cream on Sundays. Does Aunt Polly have ice cream on Sundays?" "No, your aunt doesn't like ice cream. I never saw it on the table." "Oh, doesn't she? I'm so sorry. But anyhow, if you don't eat ice cream, your stomach doesn't ache. And maybe Aunt Polly has carpets," said Pollyanna. "Yes, she has carpets." "Oh, I'm glad, because I love carpets. But we didn't have any, only a little rug," she said. Timothy unloaded Pollyanna's trunk. Nancy and the little girl came to Miss Polly's room, but Miss Polly did not sit up from her chair. She closed her book and asked, "How are you, Pollyanna?" Pollyanna ran to her and hugged her. "Aunt Polly, I'm very glad that you let me live with you. I didn't have anybody. Only there was Ladies' Aid. But now I have you." Miss Polly looked earnest. "Nancy, you can leave. And Pollyanna, be more serious, please. Do you have a trunk?" "Yes, Ladies' Aid bought me a new trunk, but I don't have many things in it. Only some old dresses and my father's books." "Pollyanna, I don't want to hear about your father. So, you must understand this. You will not speak about your father again," said Miss Polly angrily. "Why, Aunt Polly?" she asked, but Miss Polly did not listen to her. "Now we are going to your room." Pollyanna followed her aunt. She had tears in her eyes. "My aunt does not want me to be sad, so I must be happy," she thought. She was on the upstairs now. "Oh, Aunt Polly, what a lovely house! You must be happy because you are rich." "Pollyanna, don't speak like that," she cried. She stopped in front of a door and opened it. "Here is your room. I think you have everything that you need here. Now open your trunk and take out your clothes. I will send Nancy to help you. Supper is at 6 o'clock, she said and left the room. Pollyanna stood still. For a moment she looked at the bare walls, the windows without any curtains. Then she saw her trunk and remembered her little room in the faraway Western home. She fell on her knees and began to cry. Nancy came at this moment. "Oh, poor little girl, don't cry." "Oh, Nancy, I'm bad. God and the angels needed my father, but I need him too. I don't understand that. I'm bad." "Come," said Nancy. "Let's take off your clothes." "There aren't many things." "That's better. We can easily unpack then," replied Nancy. Pollyanna smiled. "So I can be glad of that, can't I?" she cried. Nancy stared. "Of course," she answered. She unpacked the books and the few unattractive dresses. Pollyanna was hanging the dresses in the closet, stacking the books on the table. "I'm sure it's going to be a very nice room. Don't you think so?" she asked after a while. There was no answer. Nancy was very busy with her head in the trunk. Some minutes later, Pollyanna said, "And I am glad because there is no mirror here, so I cannot see my freckles." Nancy was surprised. Pollyanna looked at the window. "Oh, Nancy, look at those trees, the river and houses. I can see them from the window. I am so glad now my aunt let me have this room." Nancy burst into tears. Pollyanna hurriedly crossed to her side. "Why, Nancy, why? What is it?" she cried. Then fearfully, "This wasn't your room, was it?" "My room? Oh, there's her bell," said Nancy and ran out of the room. Chapter 3. The Happiness Game. Pollyanna was alone in her room. She opened the window and saw a huge tree with great branches. First, she climbed to the window ledge. Then, like a monkey, she jumped to the nearest tree branch and to the other branches. Finally, she reached the lowest branch and she jumped to the ground. Now she was in the garden, at the back of the house. She looked around and saw a big rock out of the garden. It was a bit far, but she decided to walk there. 15 minutes later, Pollyanna was on the big rock. It was time for dinner. Nancy rang the bell at 6 o'clock for dinner. 1, 2, 3 minutes passed. Miss Polly said to Nancy, "Nancy, my niece is late for dinner, but don't call her. She must learn the rules. Give her some bread and milk in the kitchen." Nancy could only say, "Yes, madame." She was sorry for Pollyanna. She went to Pollyanna's room. "Where are you, little lamb?" she asked. But Pollyanna was not in the room. Nancy was frightened. Then she went to the garden. She looked for her, but she was not there. She was afraid. But later, she saw her on a big rock. She went there quickly and called her. "Miss Pollyanna, what are you doing here? You are late for dinner and your aunt is angry. You will have only bread and milk with us." "I'm glad. I like bread and milk, and it's very nice to eat with you." "You are glad about everything. How can you be so glad about everything?" Nancy asked. Pollyanna laughed softly. "Well, that is the game." "The game?" She was surprised. "Yes, the being glad game," answered Pollyanna. "My father told it to me. We have played it ever since I was a little girl. I told the Ladies' Aid, and they played it, some of them." "I don't understand. What kind of a game is it?" asked Nancy. "I was a little girl. Then one day I wanted a doll. My father wrote this to the helpful people in the town. I was waiting for a beautiful doll, but they sent 2 crutches for a child. I was very sorry. Then we began to play the game." "How?" "Think about it, Nancy. It's very easy. My father told me, 'You must be happy because you can walk or run. You don't need those crutches.'" "I have begun to understand," said Nancy. "After that, we always played this game. But sometimes it is difficult to play the game. For example, I couldn't find anything happy when my father died. And now I have nobody to play the game." "I will try to play it with you," said Nancy. "But now we must go home." Pollyanna ate her bread and she went into the sitting room. Her aunt was reading a book there. Miss Polly looked up coldly. "Do you have your dinner, Pollyanna?" "Yes, Aunt Polly." "I am very sorry, Pollyanna, for sending you to the kitchen to eat bread and milk," said Miss Polly with a cold voice. "Don't worry, Aunt Polly," said Pollyanna. "I'm happy because I like bread and milk and I love Nancy." Miss Polly was surprised. "Now it is time for bed. Nancy will give you a candle. Breakfast will be at 7:30. Good night, Pollyanna." Pollyanna went near her aunt and hugged her. "I had such a good time so far. Good night, Aunt Polly," she said happily as she ran from the room. "What an extraordinary girl," thought Miss Polly. "I punished her, but she was not sad." Chapter 4. Pollyanna Teaches the Game. The other day, Pollyanna woke up at 7 o'clock. She went to the window and saw her aunt and an old man in the garden. She rushed to the garden and hugged her aunt. "Oh, Aunt Polly, I am so glad this morning." "Pollyanna, do you always say good morning like this?" asked Miss Polly, pulling herself away. "No, only when I love folks. I saw you from my window and I thought, she is my really, truly aunt. You looked very good and I wanted to hug you." Miss Polly turned and walked away rapidly. Pollyanna saw the old man pruning the roses. She said, "Good morning. Do you always work in the garden?" "Yes, miss. I am old Tom, the gardener." Tom looked at Pollyanna interestedly. "You are so like your mother. I knew her when she was even littler than you." "You know my mother? Really? Oh, please tell me about her," said Pollyanna. Old Tom told her beautiful things about her mother. Then a bell sounded from the house, and Nancy came in a minute. "Pollyanna, in the mornings that bell means breakfast, and other times it means other meals. When you hear it, hurry up to the house. And now Miss Polly is waiting for you," she said. Pollyanna ran to the house. They had breakfast. For 5 minutes it was a silent meal. Then Miss Polly saw 2 flies over the table. She said sternly, "Nancy, where did those flies come from?" "I don't know, Madame." "Maybe they are my flies, Aunt Polly. There were lots of flies in my room this morning." "What do you mean? Where did they come from?" "They came through the windows. I saw them coming in." "You saw them? So you raised the windows without any screens?" "There were no screens, Aunt Polly." "Nancy," said Miss Polly, "go to Miss Pollyanna's room quickly and shut the windows. Shut the doors also." Then she turned to Pollyanna and said, "I ordered screens for those windows. This is my duty, but you forgot your duty." "My duty?" Pollyanna's eyes were wide with wonder. "Yes, keep your windows closed. This is your duty. Flies are dangerous to your health. I will give you a little book about it." "Oh, thank you, Aunt Polly. I love to read. I'm sorry, I forgot my duty. I won't raise the windows again." Miss Polly did not reply. Then she went to the bookcase and took out a little book and gave it to Pollyanna. "Here it is. Go to your room now and read it. I will be up in half an hour." Half an hour later, Miss Polly went to Pollyanna's room. "Oh, Aunt Polly, this book is very interesting. I learned many things about the flies," said Pollyanna. "Pollyanna, bring out your clothes now. I will look them over," said her aunt. Miss Polly looked at her clothes. She didn't like them because they were very old. Then she turned to Pollyanna and asked, "Pollyanna, have you been to school?" "Oh, yes, Aunt Polly." "Very good. In the fall you will enter school here. You must read aloud half an hour each day. Have you studied music?" "Not much. I learned to play the piano a little. Miss Gray, she plays for the church. She taught me." "You sew, of course." "Yes, Madame." Pollyanna sighed. "The Ladies' Aid taught me that, but I had an awful time." "Well, I shall teach you sewing." She paused and thought for a minute, then went on slowly. "At 9 o'clock every morning you will read aloud half-hour to me. Before that you will put this room in order. Wednesdays and Saturdays, after 9:30, you will spend with Nancy in the kitchen, learning to cook. Other mornings you will sew with me. That will leave the afternoons for your music. I shall, of course, find a teacher at once for you." Pollyanna cried out in dismay. "Oh, but Aunt Polly, you haven't left me any time at all just to live." "To live? What do you mean?" "I mean living, doing the things you want to do, playing outdoors, reading, to myself of course, climbing hills, talking to Mr. Tom in the garden and Nancy. That's what I call living, Aunt Polly." Miss Polly lifted her head irritably. "Pollyanna, you are the most extraordinary child. You will have a proper amount of playtime, of course. I am willing to do my duty. You must be willing to do yours." Timothy will drive us into town at 1:30 this afternoon. We will buy clothes for you." So they went out for shopping. After shopping, Pollyanna went to the kitchen to see Nancy. Nancy told her about her own family, her mother and her sisters. "All my sisters have lovely names," said Nancy. "They are all Algernon, Floribel, and Estelle. I hate Nancy." "Oh, Nancy, don't say this. I like Nancy, because it is your name, and it is you." "Well, anyhow, you can be glad it is not Hepzibah." "Hepzibah!" cried Nancy. "What an ugly name." "Yes, you are right. Nancy is better than Hepzibah." They both laughed. "We are playing the game," said Nancy. "Yes," answered Pollyanna. Pollyanna began the lessons with her aunt, sewing, practicing, reading aloud, and cooking in the kitchen. After her lessons, she had a lot of time. She did what she liked almost every afternoon from 2 until 6 o'clock. There were no children the age of Pollyanna to play with, but she was not bored. "I don't mind it at all," she explained to Nancy. "I'm happy because I walk around, see streets, houses, and watch people. I just love people. Don't you, Nancy?" "Well, I cannot say I love all of them," she answered. Every day she walked in town and she met with new people. One of them was a man. She saw this man every morning. He was always alone. The man always wore a long black coat and a high silk hat. He seemed in his 50s. One evening, Pollyanna approached him and said, "How are you, sir? It is a nice day, isn't it?" "Did you speak to me?" the man asked in a sharp voice. "Yes, sir. I said it is a nice day, isn't it?" "Ahem," he grunted. Then he walked away. Pollyanna laughed. She thought he was a funny man. The next day, Pollyanna saw the man again. "It is not as nice as yesterday, but it is pretty nice," she said cheerfully. "Who are you and why are you talking to me every day?" "I am Pollyanna Whittier. I thought you were lonesome." The man was surprised. He walked away saying nothing. Miss Polly was sending food to Mrs. Snow once a week. Mrs. Snow was a poor and sick woman. She had to stay in bed. Nancy was always taking her some food, but Pollyanna wanted to take the food for a change. "She is not a funny woman," said Nancy to Pollyanna. "Nobody saw her smiling or laughing. She is not pleased with anything. She wants chicken when I bring fish, and fish when I bring chicken." "I love to meet different people," said Pollyanna. Pollyanna went to Mrs. Snow. A young girl opened the door. She was Mrs. Snow's daughter. Pollyanna followed the girl and entered the sick room. The room was gloomy. She saw a woman half sitting in the room. "How are you, Mrs. Snow? I'm Pollyanna, Miss Polly's niece. I have come to live with her. That's why I am here this morning." "Very well, thank you. Your aunt is very kind, of course, but I am not fine. I have not slept last night." "You lose a lot of time by sleeping. Don't you think so?" "Lose time by sleeping!" exclaimed the sick woman. "What kind of a girl are you?" Pollyanna laughed. Mrs. Snow began to like her. "Well, please go to that window and pull up the curtain. I want to see your face," Mrs. Snow said. "Oh, then you will see my freckles," said Pollyanna, and pulled up the curtain. "I am so glad you wanted to see me, because now I can see you. You are very pretty," Pollyanna said. "Me? Pretty?" said the woman. "Well, yes, you are. Didn't you know it?" "No, I didn't," answered Mrs. Snow. "Oh, but your eyes are so big and dark, and your hair has very beautiful curls." I haven't looked at a looking glass for a long time. Can you give it to me, please?" "But firstly, can I fix your hair just a little before you see it?" "Well, yes," she said. "Oh, thank you. I love to fix people's hair." After a few minutes, she was ready. Pollyanna gave her the looking glass. Yes, I have liked myself, but I am sick in bed all my days." "But you can be glad about things," she said. "Be glad about things? How?" Pollyanna told her about the happiness game. "You can be happy too, Mrs. Snow. You can think about other people. They are not ill. You must be happy for them. And you can use your hands and you can watch outside." It was raining the next time Pollyanna saw the man. "Good evening, sir. It is not so nice today, is it?" she asked. The man stopped suddenly. He seemed angry. Well, see here, little girl. I don't know if the sun shines or not. I am not interested in the weather. Yes, sir, I know you are not. That's why I told you, said Pollyanna. The man was surprised. Why don't you find someone your own age to talk to? He asked. I would like to, sir, but there are not any here. But I am happy to talk to you. The next day, the man greeted Pollyanna. Good afternoon. The sun is shining today. My name is Mr. Pendleton. He was smiling. Pollyanna thought she had a new friend now. When Pollyanna came back home, she told Nancy about the man. Nancy was surprised. Are you sure? Did that man speak to you? She asked. Yes, why? Asked Pollyanna. He never speaks to anybody. He is John Pendleton. He lives by himself in a big house. It is very interesting. Chapter 5. Introducing Jimmy Bean. Miss Polly was still earnest. She was teaching Pollyanna sewing. Pollyanna was reading aloud to her for an hour every day. One day, Miss Polly went upstairs to look for a shawl. Pollyanna saw her and thought she was coming to her room to visit her. Oh, Aunt Polly, please come in. I love friends. Miss Polly entered the room. Aunt Polly, I love this room. Yes, I know it has not got carpet, curtain, or pictures, but... Pollyanna stopped suddenly and blushed. What do you mean, Pollyanna? Said Miss Polly sharply. Nothing, Aunt Polly. I always wanted them and didn't have them, but I love my room, my table, chairs. I have not got a looking glass, but it's not important. So I don't have to see my freckles. And there can't be a better picture than my window. Miss Polly rose suddenly. You have said quite enough, she said. 1 hour later, Miss Polly said to Nancy, Nancy, you will move Pollyanna's things to the room near mine. It is big enough, and she can sleep there better. Nancy was very happy. She found Pollyanna. Miss Pollyanna, you don't have to stay in this small attic room anymore. You will move to the room near her room. It is a big room and has carpet, pictures, a looking glass, and a comfortable bed. Really? Cried Pollyanna. She was happy and went to thank her aunt. August came. One day Pollyanna found a baby cat in the garden. It was very pretty. It was mewing pitifully. Pollyanna brought it home. Aunt Polly, I found this little cat in the garden. I think nobody owns it. I love cats. I know you would be glad to let it live here. Miss Polly looked at the cat. She did not care for the cats, not even pretty, healthy, and clean ones. Ugh, Pollyanna, what a dirty cat! Oh, no, Aunt Polly, it is so scared. You will let it live here, won't you? But, oh, I know you will. Nancy, look here, this pretty cat will live with us. Pollyanna ran out without listening to Miss Polly's answer. But then Miss Polly accepted the cat. Pollyanna was visiting Mrs. Snow regularly. One day, while she was bringing food to Mrs. Snow, she saw a boy sitting in a little heap by the roadside. Hello, said Pollyanna. The boy looked at her but said nothing. My name is Pollyanna Whittier. What's yours? Asked Pollyanna. Jimmy Bean, he grunted. Good. Where do you live? She asked. Nowhere. But it is impossible. Everybody lives somewhere. I have no family and no home. I am looking for a house I can stay in and work. Pollyanna was sorry for him. She thought that her aunt may let him stay. But when Miss Polly heard this, she was angry with Pollyanna. Pollyanna, what does this mean? Who is this dirty little boy? Where did you find him? She asked sharply. He is Jimmy Bean. He wants a home and a family. He can live with us, can't he? Miss Polly was shocked. Pollyanna, you brought a beggar here. Miss Polly thought Jimmy was a beggar, but he only wanted to work and live in a home. I am not a beggar, madame, said Jimmy. I don't want anything from you, and he left. Pollyanna was very upset. I'm really sorry, Jimmy, said Pollyanna to Jimmy. I hope I could find some place for you. Never mind. I think I can find one myself. I am not a beggar, you know. But I want to help you. How can I see you again? By the road where you found me today, he said and left. The next day, Miss Polly had a headache. She had a meeting at the Ladies' Aid Club. Ladies' Aid was a club which helped poor people. Aunt Polly was a member of this club. Every Saturday they met at 2 o'clock, but that Saturday she couldn't go to the meeting. She phoned the minister's wife and told her that she was sick. Pollyanna heard her aunt's phone conversation, so she decided to go to Ladies' Aid Club secretly to ask for help for Jimmy. When she went to the meeting, she felt shy because she didn't know these women. "How are you?" Pollyanna asked. "I am Pollyanna Whittier. I think you may know me. I am Miss Polly's niece." Everybody in the room was silent. They looked at this extraordinary child. "I think you may help Jimmy Bean. He is an orphan. He has no family, no home. He is 11. He wants to work. I think some of you might like him." Still there was silence. Then 1 or 2 women began to speak coldly. No woman wanted to help him. Pollyanna was very sorry for Jimmy. She did not know how to explain this to Jimmy. After the meeting, Pollyanna went out for a walk. The weather was very good. She was singing and walking, but suddenly she heard a scream. It was coming from a big garden. She entered the garden and found a man lying and screaming. It was Mr. Pendleton. "Oh, Mr. Pendleton, are you hurt?" "Ah, yes, I broke my leg. Please go to my house and telephone Dr. Chilton. There is an address book near the phone." Pollyanna did what he said, and then she went back to the garden at the man's side. "Well, what's the trouble? Couldn't you get in?" asked Mr. Pendleton. "Of course I could," replied Pollyanna. "The doctor will be here as soon as possible. I wanted to be with you till the doctor comes." "Did you?" smiled the man grimly. "I don't think I'm a good friend." "Do you mean because you were so cross?" "Thanks for your frankness. Yes." Pollyanna laughed. "Oh, you are not cross inside." Dr. Chilton came in half an hour and helped the injured man. Pollyanna returned home. She was late for dinner, but her aunt wasn't at home. "Miss Polly went to Boston because her cousin died suddenly. She will be here 3 days later. I am glad that we will stay together in the house for 3 days, only you and me." "Glad? Oh, Nancy, how can you be glad when it is a funeral?" asked Pollyanna. "Oh, but it was not the funeral I am glad for. I am just trying to play the happiness game," Nancy said. "There are some things that it is not right to play the game, and I am sure a funeral is one of them. There is nothing in a funeral to be glad about," said Pollyanna. Nancy was silent because she felt shy. 3 days later, Miss Polly came back. One morning, Pollyanna said to Miss Polly, "Aunt Polly, can I bring Mrs. Snow's chicken this week to someone else?" "I don't understand, Pollyanna," said Miss Polly. "Why?" "Oh, I forgot to tell you. I found him in the garden. I telephoned the doctor, and then I came home, of course. I haven't seen him since. When Nancy made chicken for Mrs. Snow, I thought it would be nice to take it to him instead of Mrs. Snow, this once. Aunt Polly, may I?" Yes, I think," said Miss Polly. "But who is he?" "The man, I mean, Mr. John Pendleton." Miss Polly was shocked. "Mr. Pendleton!" she cried. "Yes, Nancy told me his name. Maybe you know him?" Miss Polly did not answer this. "Do you know him?" she asked. "Oh, yes, he always speaks and smiles to me. Now I should go, Aunt Polly," said Pollyanna, and left the room. "Pollyanna, wait!" Miss Polly's voice was stern. "I have changed my mind. You should take it to Mrs. Snow as usual." "But Aunt Polly, he's a very good person. He is only cross on the outside." "Does he know who you are, Pollyanna?" asked Miss Polly. "I don't think so." "Does he know where you live?" "Oh, no, I have never told him that." "Then he doesn't know you are my niece?" "I don't think so." For a moment there was silence. "Well, you may bring the chicken to Mr. Pendleton as your own gift. Don't forget, I am not sending it." "Yes, Aunt Polly, thank you," said Pollyanna to Miss Polly cheerfully. After speaking with her aunt, Pollyanna made her second visit to the house of Mr. Pendleton. An elderly woman began to work for him since the accident. He had to stay in bed for a while, and there was a nurse. Dr. Chilton was there too. At first, the nurse did not let Pollyanna come in. "Sorry, but Mr. Pendleton gave orders not to admit anyone." Dr. Chilton came into the hall and saw the disappointed look on Pollyanna's face. "Oh, yes," said Dr. Chilton. "I am giving orders now, and Pollyanna is not anyone." "Oh, I'm so glad you let me in," said Pollyanna. Dr. Chilton was a handsome and polite man. He was in his 40s. He He was unmarried. Some people said he had a love affair in the past. "How are you today, Mr. Pendleton?" she asked. I'm trying to be fine," said the injured man. "I have brought you some chicken." "Really? Thanks. You didn't cook it, did you?" "Oh, no, Nancy cooked it." "Who's Nancy?" "She works for Aunt Polly." "Aunt Polly? Well, who is Aunt Polly?" "She is Miss Polly Harrington. I live with her. I am her niece." The man made a sudden movement. "What? You live with Miss Polly Harrington?" His face was white. "Yes, she has taken me in after my father died. My mother was her sister." Mr. Pendleton said nothing. Pollyanna was frightened. "I think I should go now. I hope you will like the chicken," said Pollyanna. Mr. Pendleton turned his head and opened his eyes. There was a longing in his eyes. "And so you are Miss Polly's niece," he said gently. "Yes, sir." The man's eyes lingered on her face. Pollyanna, feeling restless, murmured, "I suppose you know her." "Oh, yes, I know her." He hesitated and then went on, "But Miss Polly Harrington didn't send me the chicken, did she?" "No, sir, she didn't. She said to me, 'This is your gift, Pollyanna, not mine,' but I thought so," said the man, turning away his head. And Pollyanna left the room. She found Dr. Chilton waiting for her in the hall. He said, "I am going home. Do you want me to drive you to your home, Pollyanna?" "Yes, sir. I just love to ride," she said. "Do you? I think there are many things you love to do, aren't there?" he asked. "I like to do many things that are living. I don't like the other things very much, sewing and reading out loud and all that. But they aren't living." "What are they then?" "Aunt Polly says they are learning to live," said Pollyanna with a smile on her face. The doctor smiled now. "Does she?" "Yes, but I don't think you have to learn how to live." For a time they were silent. Then Pollyanna said, "Dr. Chilton, I think being a doctor is the gladdest kind of business." The doctor was surprised. "Gladdest? I always see ill and injured people," said he. "I know, but you help them. Of course you are glad to help them, so you are the gladdest person all the time." The doctor's eyes filled with tears. His life was a lonely one. He had no wife, no child. "God bless you, little girl," he said. He left Pollyanna at her door, smiled at Nancy, who was at the door. Chapter 6. Visiting Mr. Pendleton. It was on a rainy day about a week after Pollyanna's visit to Mr. Pendleton. Miss Polly entered the house. She was coming back from a friend's visit. Her cheeks were pink and her hair seemed very pretty. "Oh, Aunt Polly, what beautiful curls you have, and how beautiful you seem!" "Pollyanna, what are you talking about?" she said, trying to smooth her hair. "No, no, Aunt Polly, please don't smooth them. You don't know how pretty you look with your hair like that. Oh, Aunt Polly, can I make your hair, and can I put a flower on it?" "Pollyanna," said Miss Polly, but she seemed to like what Pollyanna had said. "Oh, please, Aunt Polly," begged Pollyanna. "But Pollyanna, Then Miss Polly let Pollyanna do her hair. "I don't know why I am letting you do this silly thing," she said. "Why, Aunt Polly? Your hair is very beautiful." The other day, Pollyanna came across with Dr. Chilton on the street. "Dr. Chilton, how are you?" she asked. "I am fine, Pollyanna. Have you got time?" "Yes, Dr. Chilton, my cooking lesson has just finished." "Well, Mr. Pendleton would like to see you today. Can you come?" "I would like to," answered Pollyanna. "Let me ask Aunt Polly." In a few minutes she returned. "Aunt Polly let me go," she said. Mr. Pendleton greeted Pollyanna with a smile today. "Welcome, Pollyanna. I think you are a very forgiving child because you came here." "Why, Mr. Pendleton? I was glad to come here and see you." "Oh, well, you know last time I saw you, I was a bit strange. I haven't thanked you for the chicken, and you are a very brave girl, because when you found me in the garden, you were not frightened. Thank you. Little girl, I want you to come and see me often, will you? I am alone and I need you. When I found out that you were Miss Polly's niece, I did not want you to come here any more. You reminded me something I wanted to forget for a long time, but then I understood that I want to see you. So, now, will you come and see me, little girl?" "Yes, Mr. Pendleton, I would love to come," answered Pollyanna. 2 hours later, Pollyanna had to return home. When she came back home, she found Nancy in the kitchen. She told Nancy about Mr. Pendleton. "How can Mr. Pendleton be so good to you? I don't understand," said Nancy. "Oh, but he is not a bad man, Nancy. I don't know why everybody thinks he is bad. Even Aunt Polly doesn't like him. Mr. Pendleton said to me that he had never wanted to see me again because I reminded him of something he wanted to forget." "What?" asked Nancy. "He said you reminded him of something he wanted to forget?" "Yes," answered Pollyanna. "What was it?" Nancy asked. "I don't know. He didn't tell me." "The mystery," said Nancy. She thought for a moment. "Oh, Miss Pollyanna, I know. Mr. Pendleton learned that you were Miss Polly's niece, and then he didn't want to see you again. Is that right?" "Oh, yes," answered Pollyanna. "Yes, I found it. Mr. Pendleton was Miss Polly's lover." "What? Oh, Nancy, it couldn't be," said Pollyanna. "Listen, Miss Pollyanna. Gardener Tom told me that Miss Polly had had a lover in the past. Tom said that her lover was living in this town, and I know it is John Pendleton." Pollyanna said nothing. She seemed thoughtful. Pollyanna entered school in September. She was a happy member of her class. School, in some ways, was a surprise to Pollyanna. Although Pollyanna was happy at school, she did not forget her old friends. She was especially visiting Mr. Pendleton. She taught him the happiness game. One day Mr. Pendleton asked, "Pollyanna, why don't you come and live with me?" Pollyanna laughed. Mr. Pendleton was such a funny man. "Mr. Pendleton, you don't really mean that." "But I do. I want you to live here. I was rich but lonely and unhappy. This big house was very quiet, and life was meaningless for me. But I have you now. My life is changing. You are a flower in this house. Stay with me, Pollyanna. Will you come?" "Mr. Pendleton, I can't. You know I am Aunt Polly's." "But your aunt does not like children." "Aunt Polly has been so good to me, and I love her very much." "Pollyanna, years ago I loved a woman very much. I hoped to bring her to this house. I thought I would be very happy with her. But I couldn't bring her here. And ever since, this big house has never been a real home. A woman's hands and heart or a child's presence makes a home. Will you live with me, dear?" "Oh, but Mr. Pendleton, you know I am Aunt Polly's." "Before you were hers, you were your mother's," he said sharply, "and it was your mother's hands and heart that I wanted long years ago." "My mother's?" Pollyanna was shocked. "Yes, I loved your mother, but she did not love me. Later, she went away with your father. The whole world suddenly turned black. For years, I have been a cross, unlovable, unloved man. Then one day you came into my life. Now I always want to be with you. Will you live with me, Pollyanna?" "Mr. Pendleton, I really love you, but I love my aunt too. She has been so good to me." "Of course she has been good to you, but she doesn't want you." "Why, Mr. Pendleton? She's glad, I know, to have—" "Glad?" interrupted the man, thoroughly losing his patience now. "Miss Polly doesn't know how to be glad for anything. Oh, she does her duty, I know. She's a very dutiful woman. I've had experience with her duty before. We haven't been the best of friends for the last 15 or 20 years, but I know her. Everyone knows her, and she isn't the glad kind, Pollyanna. She doesn't know how to be. As for your coming to me, just ask her and see if she won't let you come," he finished brokenly. "All right, I'll ask her," she said wistfully. John Pendleton smiled. While Pollyanna was returning home, the sky was darkening fast. Halfway home, she met Nancy. She had an umbrella. "Pollyanna," she said, "Miss Polly wanted me to come with this umbrella. She was worried about you." "Was she?" asked Pollyanna. "I said your aunt was worried about you." "Oh," sighed Pollyanna, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare her." "Well, I'm glad," said Nancy, unexpectedly. Pollyanna stared. "Glad because Aunt Polly was scared about me? Nancy, that isn't the way to play the game, to be glad for things like that," she objected. "There is no game in it," replied Nancy. "I never thought of it. Miss Polly worried about you, child. You don't understand what it means." "What else can it mean?" Nancy tossed her head. "Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means she's at last behaving like folks. and she isn't just doing her duty all the time." "Oh, Nancy," Pollyanna said. "She always does her duty. She's a very dutiful woman." Pollyanna repeated John Pendleton's words. "You're right, she is, and she always was. But she's something more now, since you came." Pollyanna's face changed. "I want to ask you something, Nancy," she sighed. "Do you think Aunt Polly likes to have me here? Would she mind if I wasn't here any more?" Nancy threw a quick look into the little girl's face. "Likes to have you here? Would she miss you if you weren't here?" cried Nancy. "This is what I am telling you. She sent me quickly with an umbrella because she saw a little cloud in the sky. You know, Miss Polly was a serious woman. She was stern, and she did only her duties. But after you came, she changed a lot. I think she likes to have you here." "Oh, Nancy, I'm so glad. You don't know how glad I am that Aunt Polly wants me," cried Pollyanna. Telling John Pendleton of her decision would not be easy. Pollyanna was very fond of John Pendleton, and she was very sorry for him, for his long, lonely life that had made him so unhappy and cross. She wished to find someone to live with him, and suddenly she thought of something. She sprang to her feet with a little cry of joy. She hurried up the hill to John Pendleton's house. She found herself in the great library, with John Pendleton sitting near her. "Well, Pollyanna, will you play the glad game with me all the rest of my life?" asked the man gently. "Oh, yes!" cried Pollyanna. "I've thought of the gladdest thing for you to do." "With you?" asked John Pendleton. "No, but—" "Pollyanna, you aren't going to say no!" interrupted Mr. Pendleton. "I have to, Mr. Pendleton. Aunt Polly—" "Did she say no?" "I didn't ask her," stammered the little girl, miserably. "Pollyanna!" Pollyanna turned away her eyes. "So you didn't even ask her?" "I couldn't, sir," said Pollyanna. "You see, I found out without asking. Aunt Polly wants me with her, and I want to stay, too," she confessed bravely. "You don't know how good she's been to me, and sometimes she's beginning to be glad about things, lots of things. Oh, Mr. Pendleton, I couldn't leave Aunt Polly." There was a long pause. At last the man spoke. "No, Pollyanna, I see. You couldn't leave her," he said. "I won't ask you again." The last word was so low, but Pollyanna heard. "Oh, but you don't know about the rest of it," she reminded him. "There's the very gladdest thing you can do." "Not for me, Pollyanna." "Yes, sir, for you. You said it. You said only a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence could make a home, and I can get it for you, a child's presence. Not me, you know, but another one. You're so kind and good, and so I'm glad there is Jimmy Bean. Now I know you'll take him." "Take who?" "Jimmy Bean. He'll be so glad." "Will he?" "Well, I won't," said the man decisively. "Pollyanna, this is nonsense." "You don't mean you won't take him?" "I certainly do." Pollyanna was almost crying now. "And you couldn't be lonesome with Jimmy." "I prefer being lonesome." It was then that Pollyanna, for the first time in weeks, suddenly remembered something Nancy had once told her. She raised her chin and said, "Maybe you think a nice little boy wouldn't be better than that old skeleton you keep somewhere." "Skeleton?" "Yes, Nancy said you had one in your closet somewhere." Suddenly the man threw back his head and laughed. He laughed very heartily, but Pollyanna began to cry from pure nervousness. When he saw that, John Pendleton sat promptly. "Pollyanna, I think you are right," he said gently. "In fact, I know that a nice little boy would be better than my skeleton in the closet. Sometimes we aren't willing to make the exchange. Anyway, tell me a little more about this nice little boy." And Pollyanna told him. At last Mr. Pendleton accepted Jimmy Bean and invited Jimmy Bean to his house with Pollyanna the next Saturday afternoon. "I'm so glad, and I'm sure you'll like him," sighed Pollyanna as she said goodbye. "I want Jimmy Bean to have a home and folks that care." Chapter 7. An Accident. One day, Pollyanna went to Dr. Chilton's office to visit him. "Your office is very nice, Dr. Chilton. I've never been to your home before." "This is your home, isn't it?" she said happily. "Yes, but it is not a real home. They are just rooms." "I know. Only a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence makes the rooms a home." The doctor was surprised. Mr. Pendleton said it to me, she said. I don't know why you don't have a woman. There was a moment's silence. Never mind it, Pollyanna, the doctor said. But didn't you love somebody in the past? Dr. Chilton seemed thoughtful. Yes, I loved somebody very much, but we argued a long time ago. Now I don't see her. She does not want to see me. You must find a way to see her, said she, or you will never find happiness. Then she left the office. It was on the last day of October when the accident happened. Pollyanna was coming from school. She ran quickly to her house, but in the middle of the street she did not see the car and it hit her. Pollyanna was in her bed now. She was unconscious. Aunt Polly seemed very frightened and white-faced. Nancy was crying. The doctor came to the house. There were no bones broken, but the doctor looked very grave. He shook his head slowly and said that time alone could tell. Miss Polly's face was even whiter than before. Pollyanna was in a deep sleep. About 2 days later, she opened her eyes in her bed. Miss Polly, Nancy, Tom, and a nurse were in the room. Aunt Polly, what's the matter? Isn't it daytime? Why don't I get up? She cried. She tried to lift herself, but she couldn't. Aunt Polly, I can't get up, she said. What is the matter? Why can't I get up? Miss Polly couldn't answer. She looked at the white-capped young woman standing in the window. Then Miss Polly cleared her throat and said, You were hurt, dear, by the automobile last night. But never mind that now. I want you to rest and go to sleep again. Hurt? Oh, yes, I ran. But, Aunt Polly, I feel so funny and so bad. I don't feel my legs at all. Then the nurse began to speak. Pollyanna, dear, I am Miss Hunt, and I have come here to help your aunt. Now I will give you some medicine. Please swallow these little white pills for me. Pollyanna seemed surprised. But there is no need for you taking care of me. You know I go to school. Can I go to school tomorrow? No, my dear, you should rest and sleep again. The doctor says you broke your leg. Now take this medicine. All right, agreed Pollyanna, but I must go to school the day after tomorrow. There are examinations then, you know. She spoke again a minute later. She spoke of school and of the automobile, but very soon she was silent. Miss Polly was very sad for Pollyanna. Pollyanna did not go to school the next day. She rested in her bed during a week. After a week, she felt herself a little better, but she couldn't walk. Oh, Aunt Polly, she said, I am glad that I have broken legs like Mr. Pendleton's, because it is much better than lifelong invalids like Mrs. Snow. Broken legs get well, but lifelong invalids don't. And there was another reason that I am glad I was hurt. Pollyanna! Pollyanna laughed softly. Well, Aunt Polly, since I have been hurt, you have called me dear lots of times. Aunt Polly didn't say anything. Her eyes were full of tears. She said nothing. One day Mr. Pendleton visited Pollyanna. Miss Polly talked to Mr. Pendleton lonely. I called to ask for Pollyanna, he began at once. Thank you. She is about the same, said Miss Polly. Won't you tell me how she is? His voice was not steady this time. I can't. I wish I could. You mean you don't know? Yes. But the doctor? Dr. Warren is in correspondence now with the New York specialist. They have arranged for a consultation at once. But what were her injuries that you do know? A slight cut on the head and an injury to the spine which seemed to cause paralysis from the hips down. A low cry came from the man. There was a brief silence. Then he asked, And Pollyanna? How does she take it? She doesn't understand at all, and I can't tell her. But she must know. She can't move, but she thinks her legs are broken. She says she's glad she has broken legs, because broken legs get well. I wonder if you know, Miss Harrington. I tried to get Pollyanna to come and live with me. With you? Yes, I wanted to adopt her. I am very fond of Pollyanna. I was ready to give Pollyanna all my love. Well, she said. She did not come, he answered. Why? She did not leave you. She said you were so good to her. She wanted to stay with you, and she thought you wanted her to stay, he finished. He did not look toward Miss Polly. He turned his face toward the door. When the specialist comes, and I know anything definite about Pollyanna, I will let you hear from me," said Miss Polly. "Goodbye, and thank you for coming. Pollyanna will be pleased." One day Miss Polly said to Pollyanna, "Pollyanna, my dear, we have decided to find another doctor besides Dr. Warrant. Another doctor may help you get well faster." "Dr. Chilton? Oh, Aunt Polly, I want Dr. Chilton. He is the best doctor in town, you know. Why didn't you call him?" "Oh, no, dear, I can't. I will call a new doctor from New York." "I don't believe he is better than Dr. Chilton." "Oh, Pollyanna, I can do anything for you, but I cannot invite Dr. Chilton. The new doctor is coming tomorrow. Believe me and sleep a little now." But the new doctor did not come. He had another urgent patient. Waiting days were not easy for anybody. The nurse tried to look cheerful, but her eyes had pain. Dr. Warrant was nervous and impatient. Miss Polly spoke a little. She was very sad. Pollyanna was very pale and thin. The new doctor, Dr. Meade, came a week later. He examined Pollyanna. Then Miss Polly and Dr. Meade left the room, but they forgot to close the door. In the next room, the doctor said, "Miss Polly, I am really sorry, but she will never walk again." Miss Polly was shocked. "But something must be done," she said. Pollyanna heard this and began to shout, "The nurse! I want Aunt Polly! Quick, please!" The nurse closed the door and said, "She will come a little later." "Did you hear the doctor?" Pollyanna said. "He said I wouldn't walk again. It's not true. Oh, it is true." "Oh, dear, perhaps he didn't know. He can be mistaken. Now I will give you some medicine." "I can't walk again. I can't run. I can't go to school and see my friends. I can't go to the mountains. I must find something to make me happy, but I can't find anything." Miss Polly entered the room hurriedly. She was crying too. "Oh, my dear, please calm down. You will be okay." Very soon the entire town of Beldingsville found out that Pollyanna Whittier would never walk again. The town had never been so stirred before. Everybody knew little freckled face that had always a smile of greeting, and almost everybody knew of the game that Pollyanna was playing. To think that they would never see Pollyanna's smiling face, it seemed unbelievable, impossible. A lot of people came to visit Pollyanna. Firstly, Mr. Pendleton came. He spoke with Miss Polly. "I am really sorry for the little girl. What can we do for her?" "We are doing something, of course. Dr. Meade gave some medicine, but he had almost no hope," Polly said sadly. "I have a message for Pollyanna," he said. "Will you tell her, please, that I have seen Jimmy Bean? He's going to be my boy hereafter. Tell her that I shall adopt him probably." For a brief moment Miss Polly lost her self-control. "You will adopt Jimmy Bean?" she gasped. The man lifted his chin a little. "Yes, I think Pollyanna will understand, and I think she will be glad to hear that." "Of course," faltered Miss Polly. "Thank you," bowed John Pendleton as he turned to go. In the middle of the floor Miss Polly stood, silent and amazed, still looking after the man. She could not believe what her ears had heard. John Pendleton adopts Jimmy Bean? John Pendleton, wealthy, independent, and supremely selfish, to adopt a little boy? Miss Polly went upstairs to Pollyanna's room. "Pollyanna, I have a message for you from Mr. John Pendleton. He has just been here. He has taken Jimmy Bean for his little boy. He said you'd be glad to know it." "Oh, Aunt Polly, I have so wanted to find a place for Jimmy, a lovely place, and I am glad for Mr. Pendleton. Now he has the child's presence." "The what?" asked Miss Polly. "The child's presence. Mr. Pendleton told me only a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence could make a home, and Dr. Chilton agreed to this." "Dr. Chilton? How do you know this?" Miss Polly asked. "He told me." Miss Polly said nothing. "I asked him why he didn't get married." "Pollyanna!" said Miss Polly. Her cheeks were pink. "Well, I asked him. He looked sorrowful." "What did he say?" asked Miss Polly. "He said he wanted only a woman's hand and heart, and he could do anything for her." "Well, you should sleep now, my dear," said Miss Polly. After John Pendleton's second visit to Mrs. Snow's daughter, Millie Snow came one afternoon. Millie Snow had never been before to the Harrington homestead. She blushed and looked very embarrassed when Miss Polly entered the room. "I came for the little girl," she stammered. "You are very kind. She is about the same. How is your mother?" rejoined Miss Polly. "That is what I came to tell you. You know, nothing was ever right before for my mother, but now she takes interest in things, how she looks, and her nightdress, and all that, and she's begun to knit little things, reins and baby blankets, and she's so glad that she can do it. That was all Miss Pollyanna's doings, because Miss Pollyanna told Mother she could be glad she'd got her hands and arms. So Mother began doing something with her hands and arms, to knit, you know. And you can't think what a different house it is now. Our home was so dark and gloomy, and Mother was so unhappy. But now it is a lively home. Please tell Miss Pollyanna that it's all because of her. And please say we're so glad we know her. Maybe if she knew it, it would make her a little glad. And that's all," sighed Millie. She rose hurriedly to her feet. "You'll tell her?" "Why, of course," murmured Miss Polly. Many people visited the house, and everybody had a message for Pollyanna. One day there was the little widow Benton. Miss Polly knew her well. She was the saddest little woman in town, one who was always in black. Today, however, Mrs. Benton wore a knot of pale blue at the throat. There were tears in her eyes. She spoke of her grief, then she asked if she might see Pollyanna. Miss Polly shook her head. "I am sorry, but she sees no one yet. A little later, perhaps." Mrs. Benton wiped her ears, rose, and turned and went away. But she came back hurriedly. "Miss Harrington, perhaps you'd give her a message," she stammered. "Certainly, Mrs. Benton. I shall be very glad to. The little girl has been trying for so long to make me wear some color. I thought she'd be glad to know I'd begun. If you'll just tell Pollyanna, she'll understand." And the door closed after her. A little later, that same day, there was the other widow. Miss Polly did not know her at all. The lady gave her name as Mrs. Tarbell. "I'm a stranger to you, of course," she began at once, "but I'm not a stranger to your little niece, Pollyanna. I've been at the hotel all summer, and every day I had long walks for my health. One day while walking, I've met your niece. She's such a dear little girl. I was very sad when I came up here, and her bright face and cheery ways reminded me of my own little girl that I lost years ago. I was so shocked to hear of the accident." "You are very kind," murmured Miss Polly. "I want you to give her a message from me, will you?" "Certainly." "Will you just tell her, then, that Mrs. Tarbell is glad now? Your niece will know just what I mean, and I felt that I must tell her." Miss Polly hurried upstairs to Pollyanna's room. "Pollyanna, do you know Mrs. Tarbell?" "Oh, yes, I love Mrs. Tarbell. She's sick and awfully sad, and she's at the hotel, and takes long walks. We go together. I mean we used to." Pollyanna's voice broke, and 2 big tears rolled down her cheeks. Miss Polly cleared her throat hurriedly. "Well, she's just been here, dear. She left a message for you, but she wouldn't tell me what it meant. She wanted me to tell you that Mrs. Tarbell is glad now." Pollyanna clapped her hands softly. "Did she say that, really? Oh, I'm so glad!" "But Pollyanna, what did she mean?" "It's the game and—" Pollyanna suddenly stopped. "What game?" "Nothing much, Aunt Polly. I can't tell you." Miss Polly went out of the room and called Nancy sharply. "Nancy, will you tell me what is this game that the whole town seems to know? I tried to ask the child herself about it, but she didn't say anything." Nancy burst into tears. "It means that ever since last June that child has just been making the whole town glad, and now everybody in the town is trying to make her glad." "Glad of what?" "Just glad. That's the game. It's a game Miss Pollyanna's father taught her. Because you had told her not to talk about her father, she couldn't tell you about the game." Nancy went on telling Miss Polly about the game. Miss Polly was surprised. She went to Pollyanna's room and asked her, "Oh, my dear, will you play the game with me, too?" Pollyanna was happy. "Yes, Aunt Polly," she said. Chapter 8. Miss Polly's Decision. Dr. Chilton visited Mr. Pendleton, and they talked about Pollyanna. "Mr. Pendleton, I want to see that child. I must make an examination." "Why don't you?" asked Mr. Pendleton. "Mr. Pendleton, you know the love affair between Miss Polly and me." "Yes, I know." I haven't been inside her house's door for more than 15 years. She will not let me in. You know I have pride. But you are so worried, you should forget your pride and see Pollyanna. I have a doctor friend in New York. He has been studying these sorts of things for years. I have learned much from him. Pollyanna can walk again with the help of that cure. Miss Polly is too proud to ask me, and I can't go without her invitation." While they were speaking, Jimmy listened to them secretly, and he ran to Miss Polly's house. "Miss Polly, I should talk to you. It's about Pollyanna. Dr. Chilton knows a doctor somewhere who can cure Pollyanna, but he thinks you will not let him come and see Pollyanna." Miss Polly seemed thoughtful. "I will invite Dr. Chilton," she said. Dr. Chilton came and examined Pollyanna. "Dr. Chilton, how glad I am to see you!" cried Pollyanna. "Pollyanna, dear, next week you are going to take a journey. A friend of mine will cure you," said Dr. Chilton. "And I should tell you something, Pollyanna," said Miss Polly. Her cheeks were pink. "Pollyanna, Dr. Chilton and I decided to marry. Oh, Pollyanna, it is you that has done it all. I am so happy." Pollyanna began to clap her hands. She was very glad. "I'm so happy, Aunt Polly. So Dr. Chilton, the woman you had loved years ago, was my aunt?" "Yes, Pollyanna," he said. So they started to prepare for the journey. A letter from Pollyanna. "Dear Aunt Polly and Uncle Tom, I can walk! I walked today all the way from my bed to the window. All the doctors and nurses smiled. They love me. I am so happy because I began to walk slowly. You and Dr. Chilton have married beside my bed so I could see you. I can go home very soon. I am so glad for everything. I will go to school and climb the hills and mountains again. I love you. Pollyanna."